Welcome, everyone, to the Great Paradigm Shift. This is a Saturn Neptune conjunction. My name, Erik Roth, here, shamanic astrologer, here to talk about what this all means. This has been something that pretty much all astrologers are talking about in some level, whether they're just mentioning it or spending a great deal of time with it, like Chris Brennan and Dick Dagan Best, or adding it to their uh, analysis of things. This is really like the signal, one of the signals that we're having here for humanity, that we're in a great paradigm shift right now. And I don't say that lightly. This is not something I toss around just, as if it were something minor. And this happens all the time. This is a conjunction that only takes place every 35 and a half years. And each time that it's happened, there has been some really major shifts for humanity. At the same time, we've got many other transits that are taking place that isn't just about Saturn Neptune, especially ones coming up in the future that are really special, like in July with Uranus moving into Gemini. But this is really, I mean, roughly a 3-year period. That is going on here, and the main focal point will be from this month here in June through about March of 2026. But there'll still be some lingering Saturn Neptune effects through the early part of 2027 as well. All right, well, let's get started on what this is all about here. Let's talk about what this means, the interpretation, astrologically, and how we can also navigate this whole thing, because this is really, really big. All right, so episode, we're going to talk about Saturn and Neptune. We're going to talk about what they represent. Obviously, the archetype of Aries, because that's where the conjunction takes place. We'll talk about previous Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and also last time that Saturn-Neptune was in Aries, and obviously this time around there's going to be that's the main interpretation towards the end of this video, and the Alpha Omega point and why that's special with all of this right now. Okay, so this is something I shared in the Saturn Aries video, and I'm going to talk about Neptune, or something I shared in the Neptune and Aries video, but it's good to refresh this. Saturn does represents laws, limits, borders, boundaries, and the growth through those laws, limits, and boundaries. But it also represents time as well. So Saturn has been known as the Lord of Time. So this means, like, on a personal level, we can experience Saturn's influence through hitting up against boundaries, limits, and walls. Sometimes these walls invite resistance and efforts to dismantle them, including on a collective level. Saturn also shows up with regulations, laws, procedures, and instructions, along with a delegation or usefulness of resources. Saturn can be strongly impactful regarding personal and collective health, especially with the systems of the body, except the nervous system, and health systems on a community and national level, and really health systems on a worldwide level, if we can add to that. Saturn can bring a deep sense of reality and hardness to life, including the major stresses that show up in times of major decisions and crossroads. At the same time, it can help us focus on the most critical of areas of our life to work on, to follow through, show up, and ultimately advance our life forward. So Saturn can be also seen as a liberator, in that as it helps us focus on what we can get into in our lives that are a reflection of our soul. It can liberate us from the chains that we've tied ourselves to that don't align with us. So it gives us an opportunity to look at that more closely and to harness the desire to break free from those manacles. Neptune, on the other hand, symbolizes the unseen realm of formlessness, dreams, heart, spiritual, mystical domain. So it's really an antithesis, if you will, to what Saturn brings in. This is Neptune is inherently free, whereas Saturn is like showing us the third, this the toughness and the hardness of the third dimensional reality. Neptune's presence in one's life can lead to confusion, doubt, and disillusion of reality and other fixed material things. It tests our ideologies and scopes of beliefs, perhaps transmuting the contents to other ideas, and so that they can thought forms and ideas and dreams can drop in more readily. So Neptune does have gifts like Saturn does. We can come to know Neptune when we're in a time of not knowing, or as a romanticism of fantasies in our lives, or potentially could become real in the future. Neptune tends to veil what may or may not be there, such as a mirage that ultimately turns into an illusion or a cloud that looks like a certain shape and then breaks apart and drifts away. But there's also the idea, the formlessness of that and the dissolution of that can also impact us in a way where an idea does germinate. It does come in. And that's where having Saturn's help can be really, really powerful in being able to germinate that seed into something that can actually be tangible reality, into form. The main lesson of Neptune is to open our senses and hearts beyond the fixed rationality of the mundane world. It is to help us detach from things that no longer serve us, freeing us from toxic or otherwise disserving patterns. So it's also a liberator. I mean, all planets on some level liberate us, but they each do it in their own way. So for Neptune, in Neptune's case, it's like detachment from the reality and from our responsibilities and realizing that we have the keys to liberate ourselves, that we just have to open up to our spirit, our heart, and to be one with the universe, if in reality. And that's also part of being human too, just as much as the hard reality of Saturn is the unreality and the timelessness and visions of Neptune is also part of the fabric of what makes us human, what makes us souls inhabiting the physical form of being human here. So Aries, that's where the conjunction takes place. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It's a powerful fiery indicator or initiator in the world, assertively driving headlong into mission and purpose. Aries is also highly reactive, strong-willed, and competitive. Aries is a defender of the cosmic order, the one who shows up to be front and center and to help those that are not able to help themselves. This is done through instinctual actions, bringing to bear any talents, skills, or modalities that this sign can in a variety of situations. Preparing for battle doesn't always mean doing violence or to achieve goals, but is more of a metaphor for Aries to prepare itself in step into the arena and step into the arena to meet any challenge that comes forth. So it's the alpha point, and it's ready to take on whatever is thrown its way. And it doesn't have all the gifts and skills of all the other signs, perhaps, but it does have the strength of initiative and will and ability to learn and to cope and adapt to the challenges that come forth. At least that's the intent. At least that's the archetypal expression. Now, in an individual case, it could be expressed differently depending on how much we haven't grown or we have grown as a human being, as a soul. So there could be. This is not a statement that says, "Oh, this is perfectly for everybody," when it can vary in each individual human being that has Aries in their chart. So here's the main, like, if we wanted to boil down Saturn Neptune into something, this is something I want to thank Richard Tarnas and his work in the Cosmos and Psyche book. There's two really main, like this polarity of Saturn Neptune and other hard aspects. Saturn Neptune squares, Saturn Neptune oppositions. One is a loss of faith and disillusionment, especially for reality and systems and structures, maybe even for our dreams as well. And the other is the reawakening of hope, discovery of spiritual resources, and inner faith. And these two polarities are very powerful in humanity. And, fear certainly can cross both of these, whether we work with fear constructively and realize that we have to be courageous and brave in that, or allowing fear to completely disarm us and to dominate our lives. Essentially, we're running away from our future, running away from our destiny, running away because it's too hard, or it's you're scared, you're sacrificing. Yeah, that is part of what the sort of the crossroads that humanity is at right now. This is it. This is not a some kind of passing thing that is going to be taken lightly. This is reality. I mean, even as we're talking here at the time of this recording, we're seeing the some of the impact of what's going on. We're especially here in the United States, some of the powerful polarization, politics, and the continued desire to kind of sow seeds of separation and to separate and conquer, to divide us all, including starting wars. And we're seeing that as well with Iran. So there's a potential for so there's a potential for greater harmony and unification with this as well. It's happened before in history, and the potential is here today, even with the divisiveness and the polarization that's taking place. Okay, so this is something I talked about in the Neptune in Aries video, but I'm bringing this back to show this is part of a larger framework, that it isn't just about Saturn Neptune, but Neptune in Aries and Saturn in Aries as well. So the last time that Neptune was in Aries was in 1861 to 1875, and the US was fighting for its future expression. In fact, the very first battle of the Civil War, the attack on Fort Sumter, um, was within a day of Neptune entering the sign of Aries. I mean, it was that close. So the spark of Aries can be very volatile and reactive, but also to catalyze people into action, especially to fight for justice and freedom. A new seed is intended to crack open and release out into the world in ways that help shift the currently decaying paradigms and world structures. Our dreams, ideologies, and hearts will be put to the test during this time in ways we've never experienced. Especially for those that are younger, this is a whole brand new experience. Like in their people in their 20s and teens and early 30s, or even their 40s, where they were just a kid the last time that this Saturn Neptune conjunction happened, 1989. So this is something that like is really, really profound. So, make sure everyone is buckled up for this powerful event that is already in progress, just like you're tuning into a program that's already in progress, or a sporting event, or whatever it might be. We're here. This is it. I want to share some charts here about what this looked like astrologically here. So you can see that Neptune Aries right here, and it was 6 degrees away at this time. This was in the middle of this massive stellium in Pisces and Aries. And Neptune and Saturn were really profoundly mixed into this. So that March and April period for humanity was really, really strong. It was the sort of the catalyst for getting all the stuff that's going on right now going. Now, some might point to February being more of the start of that, because that's when Venus first moved into Pisces, uh, and sorry, Aries, when first moved to Aries, and then eventually retrograded in March of 2025. Also, same thing with Mercury in March and April as well. Those two played enormous roles, and you can look back to my March and April videos for more information about that. But at the same time, we also have Chiron here and Eris here, all playing a role in all of this. This is really an intense, has been an intense alignment and continues to be an intense alignment. Well, Saturn moved into Aries back on May 24th, 2025. And when it did so, it caught up with Neptune. Before it was 6 degrees away, but now it was only 1.5 degrees. Saturn moves a lot faster than Neptune. Neptune takes 165 days to orbit the sun, whereas Saturn takes under 30 years to do so. All right, so coming up here in July, this is a big event. Now, the exact conjunction between Saturn and Neptune doesn't take place until February 2026. But the retrograde points between Saturn and Neptune are really, really big. For Neptune, it's July 4th. For Saturn, it's July 12th. And I've got the middle on the bottom of the screen here. I got the middle one highlighted. This essentially, they're just within a hair of each other. So if someone were to look in with a telescope in the sky, Neptune and Saturn would be really close together, within a quarter of 1 degree or 14 minutes of a degree. There's 60 minutes in each sign. So it's right there. Now they're hovering around the 2 degrees Aries mark. So people that have um, any planets or points uh, in the early degrees, the first few degrees of Aries and the last couple of degrees of Pisces are really going to be in the throes of this, particularly those that are at 0, 1, and 2 degrees Aries or 29 degrees Pisces. Like that is like the epicenter of this all. And if you happen to be in a major cycle, like maybe a Saturn square Saturn cycle or Neptune conjunct Moon cycle, and then Saturn comes around, this is huge. This is also a paradigm shift for you as well. I just did a session for somebody that has their personal Jupiter position being strongly activated by Saturn and Neptune right now. And so they're in while they're in a Jupiter return. So this is like seriously major. This is not something that is going to repeat in the same way it will in their lifetime. So it's really profound, and it's a chance for them to shift their what their life is and how they define it, and to really come into a space with it and understand what it means for them personally. Like, say, what do you want to do with literally what do you want to do with your life? How far you've come, and maybe you're happy in what you're doing in your life. Maybe there's some new adjustments or some new things that you can bring in, or some things you need to let go of. Because one of the things about Saturn and really a lot of planets, but Saturn in particular is about shedding our skin, letting go of things that no longer belong in our lives, burdens, responsibilities. For Neptune, it could that can show up as things that just dissolve in ways that where you're not making the decision, but they just tend to fade out. Like the end of a movie, perhaps. It just fades out. That's Neptune. And also apropos because a movie is fiction and it's on a virtual experience rather than a lived reality in that way. But one of the amazing things that's going on, and I want to do a video just on this, is that Uranus and Pluto are bookending this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Uranus in July will move into Gemini, and Pluto's roughly, well, at that time, Pluto's under 3 degrees Aquarius. So it's a double sextile, or what can be called a mini grand trine. And you have this alignment here with these four outer planets that won't come around again in our lifetime in the same way. Certainly not with Saturn. With Neptune, yes, there'll be a little bit more of that energy next year too, and beyond. With Uranus, a little bit longer, but not very much longer because it'll move quickly too. It'll take 7 years to move through the sign of Gemini and then move into Cancer, and Neptune and Pluto will be far behind. and they won't be sextiling or trining Uranus. So this is another representation of why this is so unique. In 2026, Neptune and Saturn move back into Aries. So later this year, September, Saturn will move back into Pisces, and I think it's November when Neptune moves back into Pisces. And so they will move back for a few more months before re-ingressing, re-ingressing back into the sign of Aries. And so for Neptune, it's on January 26, 2026, and Saturn is only 2 degrees away at that point. And then on February 13th, 2026, they're only half a degree away when Saturn moves back into Aries for the next few years. And so you can see that here. And at that time, they're not quite at that double sextile. Pluto's still has reached 4 degrees by that point, and Uranus had backed into Taurus by then. So, but later in the year, it'll move back into Gemini, and I believe that's in May of 2026 is when that does that. I'll have to check that. I'll be doing a special video just on Uranus in here in Gemini. And my July video will have some of that as well coming up at the end of this week. Okay, and then here's the actual conjunction. February 20, 2026 at 0045 Aries. At the time of that conjunction, the moon is 12 degrees away in Aries, and Mercury is 10 degrees away, 10 and a half degrees away in Pisces at 2004 Pisces. And so this will represent another lineup in Pisces and Aries. Typically, Venus and Mercury tend to come around here in the February and March energy, or time period, I should say, when it's in Pisces, but typically not doing retrograde loops at the same time as it did in 2025. Like that's part of the reason it was so powerful. But here we have Saturn and Neptune showing up, and it's remarkable because we had a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in 0 degrees Aquarius, sextiling that back in December of 2020. And then we have other things that'll happen at 0 degree mark. But it's remarkable because that was sextiling this. So there's something about that time period in 2020 that is also really, I would say, is helping to comment and energetically to this time that we're living in now, and the special place that this 0 degree Aries point is. It's the start and end of the zodiac. That's 29 degrees Pisces is the end, 0 degrees Aries is the beginning. So we're having this really, really this massive shift for humanity taking place. And it was reflected in the what we might see as chaos around us. But chaos is essentially representing that things are changing. And when chaos happens, it means things are needing to realign themselves. Things are imbalanced, and trying to come back into some sort of you might say, orderly state or semi-orderly state, if you will. So whenever there's extreme chaos or extreme order, there will be the opposite will happen in order to help balance that out and bring it back into some kind of homogeny. So it's something to watch out for as things show up. Just as, especially in the U.S. and other places, there have been, massive things that have taken place, but there's also been a counter to that, and potentially even much more counters to the extremes in the coming months and years ahead. So something to be aware of. So starting early, this is something I noticed in 2024. Saturn and Neptune got within 11 degrees of each other between May 29th and July 28th of 2024. And in America here, we had some really massive shifts in politics during the general election season with an assassination attempt and with a change of the Democratic ticket because the president Biden at the time, he stepped down, and Kamala Harris, the VP, took the place, and so it was another kind of a race, and so we found ourselves in a completely new place. And Richard Tarnas, in his work Cosmos Psyche, he talks about the wider orbs of 15 degrees that he tends to use with the outer planets. And he noticed that, when he compiles information in that book of all the different outer planet alignments, he uses that wide orb of 15 degrees from the conjunction point, which 2024 would fall into that category. So we did experience some early indications of this through the illusion of polarization that takes us away from the core center. This can express as a loss of faith and disillusionment on one side and deeper reawakening of hope on the other, at times in conflict within the same person. So that other slide I shared earlier about the main points of Saturn Neptune, that can exist contradictory within and conflicting within the same person. I mean, human beings are, in a way, walking contradictions or walking conflicts, but that's part of our life path, is to come into balance with that and know that they can live in harmony, and that it doesn't need to be reactive and violent. It doesn't need to be sabotaging ourselves everywhere we go, but it can come into a place of more a peaceful understanding of that. That's where the alchemy of all of that comes in, and this is the planets and astrology that helps us alchemize really, really strongly. Something I've been working with, I should say, in my own life personally, but also in my experiences in the world around me, and how the archetypes are interacting with one another. What is the dialogue? What's happening there? It's really, really powerful. And one could look around you and see this happening in individuals, and in communities and in countries. So this is something that I would encourage more and more people to study, to look at, and to see, because the archetypes are really play profound roles in our lives. So Saturn's involvement in Neptune is something I shared a little bit more about in the previous videos that I did with Neptune and Aries and Saturn Aries. But 2025, 2026 is the main thing, the core of all this. So previous times when Saturn and Neptune conjunct, we've been uncovering unseen secrets of DNA, early development of photography and film, spiritual structures, ideas, visions manifesting before our senses. It can also lead to opportunities to see the idealisms and ideologies, and to shake the foundations of humanity. So we're not going to go back too many years necessarily and review all of that. If you wanted to see all the different Saturn Neptune incarnations over thousands of years, definitely go to the astrology podcast in by Chris Brennan and Nick Dagan Best, where they cover all this. In fact, this is part of the inspiration for me to learn more and get perspective about Saturn Neptune, more than I've read about and more than I've experienced. I myself was born with a Saturn Neptune opposition, almost exact. So in fact, it shares, I could share with you all that anybody that has a hard aspect of Saturn and Neptune, to some degree trines and sextiles as well, but hard aspects in particular, um, give you this very unique way about yourself. And you might, you could tend to be able to think and or experience life differently than others who don't have that sort of alignment. Like the babies that are being born today, or that they were born in 1989. They're the last time this happened. Very different individuals, and their creative expression of who they are. The in fact, I just did a session for somebody that was born in 52, 53 area, where there was two Saturn Neptune cycles ago, and how unique that individual is. There are other signatures on the charts that, when I look at on a personal level, can really convey that. This is just one of the ways that can be conveyed. So these two planets conjunct every 35 and a half years. And so when you look at those folks that are in that time period, or maybe they have the opposition like I do, or they were having a Saturn Neptune square, those are some really unique creative expressions, artisans, musicians, unique thinkers, philosophers, teachers. These are the ones that are going to be, I think, show up very in a more helpful way for humanity. Um, so the last time that these two conjuncted in the sign of Aries, though, was 1703. And North America was still being, it was the beginning of the what was called the Queen Anne's War, and they were fighting over North America, the European powers. Uh, and so it's something to think about, but go back all the way back then, so that there's something here about that time as well. It wasn't at 0 degrees Aries. This was at, I think, 11 degrees Aries at the time that they conjuncted. So I don't think as quite as profound as this time. I think this time is definitely more intensified, not just because of that, but because of the some of the other things I talked about. All these planets moving into new signs. I did the year overview outlook in December of 2024 about 2025 and talking about all these outer planets moving into new signs. And this is really like one of the major initiators for humanity right now, this Saturn Neptune conjunction period here. And I'll share a little bit more later here as we get into this. So one thing to look at when we're talking about Saturn and Neptune, we're looking at the overall timeline too. So the conjunction is only a 1 day event on February 20th, 2026. And as I shared before, we can have a much larger window. So that window for me and using Cosmos and Psyche in this Richard Tarnas's work, 15-degree-ish orb. So from 2024 to 2027. But they were conjunct in 1989 in the sign of Capricorn. And then about every 8 to 9 years, they come into a square and an opposition, and then it's another square and then a conjunction. So I've got here 89 was the last time they were conjunct. In 1998 to 99, there were three waxing squares. In 2006 to 2007, there were three oppositions. That was just at the edge, just before Pluto moved into Aquarius, and just before right at the edge of when the world went into a recession, a great recession due to the housing market collapse and the banking crisis. And Saturn was in Leo and Neptune was in Aquarius at that time. And then 2015, 2016, we had three waning squares with Saturn in Sagittarius and Neptune in Pisces. That was the time that Trump announced his candidacy for the first election that he won in 2016. So something to think about that Donald Trump is actually playing a role. Like he was part of this experience here. And now we were reaching this conjunction period. So there's something about the conclusion of all of this that is coming into form. And make sure you again buckle up for this wild ride that's coming for humanity. So one of the things about in 1989 that played a role in how powerful that was Uranus's um, experience or conjunction with Saturn at that time. So I'll talk about it when I talk about 1989. So here are the previous Saturn Neptune exact conjunctions all the way back to 1667. I won't name them all, but I'm bringing this in because there's a larger pattern of Saturn Neptune that isn't talked about very much, that is over 3 centuries long. So there are 9 distinct versions of this pattern. If we were to do a 9, where instead of a 4-pointed, spokes on the wheel, or 6 or 8, this is 9. And so every 322 to 323 years, Saturn and Neptune come back around to the same sign it was in in conjunction, but precessed about 10 to 11 degrees. So in 1703, you can see here it was at 11 degrees Aries, and now 323 years later, it's in Aries, but at 0 degrees. So that means the next time in over 3 centuries later, when they conjunct again the same pattern track, or spoke of the wheel, it's going to precess into the sign of Pisces. There's also another part of this pattern that has to do with the modalities. So, you can call it modality waves. Mutable, fixed, cardinal. That's how it goes. Mutable, fixed, cardinal, mutable, fixed, cardinal. Or in that order, you could say cardinal, mutable, fixed, but you never get a cardinal before the fixed. Unless it's in a state of transition, because it can transition out of that and back into another modality. But and that's how the order goes. So we're right now at the end of the cardinal sign modality with Libra, Capricorn, and Aries. It always does three of them, or sometimes, well, two or three, I should say. The third one sometimes can be right on the edge of the modality. Um, so the next time that they conjunct in 2061, it moves into mutable. So this is just like in Saturn Jupiter conjunctions. They can come in, well, that comes more in elemental waves. This comes in modality waves. Um, so something to consider again. There's a much larger pattern at stake here, not just what's happening in the here and now. I keep mentioning 1989, and that is the last time that Saturn and Neptune were conjunct. So this is the time when the Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union was showing significant signs of dissolving, and Eastern Europe erupted in social political revolutions. We had the Tiananmen Square massacre, which maybe in another universe that would have succeeded in democratic revolution in China, but instead it was a reactive force that was an oppressive force that came down and completely dissolved the revolution. Um, the United States takes military action to arrest the leader of Panama at that time, and Noriega was at one time a U.S. military and CIA asset, and he was sort of there at one time, kind of almost a puppet there. He was involved in the Iran-Contra challenges down the scandal that was going on at that time in the late 80s with Ronald Reagan, and then later George H.W. Bush. So you can see that they went in to take him out because it was like part of their own mess, the US's mess that they created, and to also still have Panama under its thumb, if you will. And it's fascinating that today now that Panama is such a hotbed of activity as well, with Donald Trump wanting to seize it, wanting to take control of it, and having the U.S. control it in some way. So there's a connection between 1989 and 2025, 2026 with Panama as well. There was the savings and loan crisis that reached its tipping point, which also brought the U.S. into kind of this mini recession at that time, and was factored into the stock market crash a little bit in the 1987. But 1989, the Keating Five were arrested as part of that scandal. Um, the World Wide Web was created in 1989, another revolutionary moment. And then the FW de Klerk in South Africa was and became the last president of the apartheid system there. But it marked the beginning of the end of the apartheid. So this was like the year where the South African leaders at the time and the white minority saw that this was going to be ending in the not too distant future here. And it wasn't until then, just a few years later, I think, or a year or two later, that Mandela started having conversations with Clark, from what I've read. So this is something that we can um, connect to and realize, like the surge that's happening now of all this oppression, because it's a dying totalitarianism, um, authoritarianism, dictatorship, fascism. This is not something that where the world is just going to be trapped back into. That there's still moments of that out of desperation for these leaders of thinking that that's how they're going to control, but in the end they're going to lose because the world is shifting, where consciousness has evolved well beyond where we're in 1989 or in the 1940s or in the 1860s the Civil War. So there's more of that coming in. One thing to note in 1989, some of the energy that was provided there wasn't just Saturn Neptune, but Uranus brought in the element of surprise and breakthroughs while conjuncting Saturn during that time. So something to consider. Now, the 10-degree orb, if we want to use just 10 degrees, it's from 1988 to 1990. If you use 15, you can maybe extend it just a little bit more than that. But that was also so, there were things that were building up in 1988 and then also happening in 1990 that was part of this dynamic in 1989. And then in 52, 53, the two times ago of when Saturn and Neptune were conjunct and part of the 1951-54 period, this is where McCarthyism had reached its height and its downfall too, because the tide started to turn against Senator McCarthy in 1954. McCarthyism essentially is was about the Red Scare. It was like this really powerful time of Americans being frightened by communists and especially politicians. And we were building up, strongly building up, racing to build up a nuclear arsenal. And it was our first test of the hydrogen bomb during that period. It was also when East Germany officially created an inner German border in Berlin that was, and in Germany too, that was closed by East Germany during that time. Um, so this was a prelude to the construction of the Berlin Wall, which happened in 1961. Um, this was also the ending period of the Korean War, which again, a lot of Cold War stuff, a lot of stuff around Russia happening here. And Stalin died during this time. Let's see, what was the year that Joseph Stalin, yes, 1953. So right in the middle of all of that. There also noticed that something that Chris Brennan and Nick Dagan best noticed is that nearly every Saturn Neptune conjunction, there was a massive thing that happened with Russia. Like in this case, not just the Cold War with the US, but Joseph Stalin dying. In 1989, the Soviet Union started to fall back on its heels, and the Warsaw Pact, the Eastern Bloc of countries, started having political social revolutions that ended up where these countries later gained independence from Russia. So there is this feeling that during this time, the next couple of years, that something else big will happen with Russia as well. But some other things that were happening, really amazing technological breakthroughs. The first polio vaccine was developed, the rise of television as a mainstream medium, the first transistor radio was ended up being invented in 1953. So there was the first ascent to the top of Mount Everest took place. And there was a thing about immigration during that time as well in the context of the Cold War in 1952. The Immigration Nationality Act was signed into law at that time. So there's something about that. I haven't looked too deep into that, but I will say that there's something about that that's going to be playing a role, I think, that we're already seeing the massive effects of right now in the US with people just being essentially just taken literally off the streets and in courtrooms by people that are not identifying themselves, just pulling up in a van and grabbing people, disappearing them. And so that's part of I mean, you see this and it's intense, but there's something about that that's gonna where the tide I think it's reaching its full extreme. And the tide, I just feel intuitively that the tide's going to turn way the other way against that in the coming months and year or two. So something to look toward. There was also an uprising in Kenya in 1952 during this conjunction period, which ultimately led to Kenya's independence from Britain in 1963, which was 1963 was not quite at the opposition between Saturn Neptune, but it was right in that zone where there was some. I think I looked at it. I think it was right at the square of it. I'll have to look at that, but it was in that zone. And Queen Elizabeth II was crowned the Queen of England in 1953 as well. So one thing I want to talk about is Neptune and Aries. Um, this was in the Saturn. That was in the middle of the Saturn Neptune opposition, and obviously there was the U.S. Civil War taking place. What was really interesting about that time was that it was also an emancipation of serfs in Russia by the Tsar Alexander II. So they were becoming more free. Like countries were starting to realize, like, oh, the people are rising up and they're gonna have their independence. And so in Russia, it took a huge step. And it also happened partly in Poland, but it wasn't quite as much because Russia controlled Poland at that time. At the end of the Civil War, the KKK took its place. So the vestiges of the slavery, the really the white nationalism formed, the modern white nationalism formed during this time, right at the end of the Civil War. But at the same time, there was German unification. The Kingdom of Italy was unified as well, and then various other revolutions and uprisings in Europe, including France, Poland, Lithuania, and Crete. And there was a great awakening, a third great awakening in religion, with many, many movements, especially in Christianity, uh, including outside Christianity, of theosophy, of thelema, spiritualism, and Christian Science, as well as Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think the Mormon movement was just starting to get going around that time too, if I'm not mistaken. So just something to be aware of with that. And then there was the Saturn Neptune opposition in Libra Aries that was taking place in the middle of all of this. So Saturn Neptune really do play very significant roles in world history and create helping to opportunities for major events to assert themselves. And then this is the last time Saturn and Neptune were conjunct, 1703. I talk about this more so in the Neptune and Aries video, but I will share like there were things that were happening, especially like in North America, but also in Russia. There was in that Saturn Neptune conjunction. There was the founding of the city of St. Petersburg, which ended up becoming like their capital at one time, before Moscow became their capital much later. Um, but there was things about uh, last execution of people convicted of witchcraft in England was conducted. There was the famous 47 Ronin and the tales around that was during this time as well. The War of Spanish Succession embroiled Europe in war to control Spain. And then there was also, of course, the war in North America taking place. And the very first newspaper is born in Boston, in North America, the lasting newspaper, the one that's still around, called the Boston Newsletter, still happening today. So major themes of Saturn Neptune conjunctions: belief turned into action, rapid decay and revolution of societies and culture, uprising against unjust laws and oppression, counterculture movements, oppression of movements, protests and voices, um, religious spiritual awakenings and revolutions, unification, nationalism born from the severing and separation of people and territory, and amplification of the wars of belief and religion. So that kind of folds into some of that there, but also labor and workers' rights. That's definitely something that is a big part of it as well. Hope for the future. Yes, absolutely. Borders and boundary shifting. Yes, more of that as well. And then the seedings of the previous cycle come to show their progeny or their fruit in the next Neptune and Aries and Saturn Aries cycle. So the things that were born in 1989, and potentially from 52 to 53 are also being bearing fruit here again. And so recycling, as it's been said, history can rhyme and have a rhythm. It doesn't necessarily have an exact repeat, but you can have a lot of themes that carry over that look like a repeat. So history will rhyme, from previous time periods. So, just be aware of that. And I am a little bit, alarmed by the US's involvement with Iran because of the astrological impact here, and that the potential for the US to have a sustained war over the coming years is certainly possible. Um, Not just with Saturn and Neptune, but with the upcoming Uranus and Gemini transit as well, because the US will have a Uranus return. And each time they've had that, there's been a major, major war, like on a scale where we fought our biggest wars, or most of our biggest wars. The war that helped create the country in the original revolution, this US Civil War, and World War II. And in fact, those two wars, World War II and the Civil War, were the ones that the US had its highest amount of casualties. And so we're now not long, not long before the actual Uranus return. So just, be aware of all of that. That it's not guaranteed that we're going to have that World War III is going to happen, but there's a lot of saber rattling out there right now that's much more intense than before. And so, with the ongoing Ukrainian war with Russia, and then Israel's war with Iran, and the with the Gaza population, Hamas in particular, this is something just to have that awareness of that. There's a lot of resources and um, religious fervor, and all that's taking place there. It's a stew pot of that could boil over even more than it is. But it doesn't mean guarantee it happens. Like again, I am optimistic, but I am cautiously optimistic with regards to the future. So I mentioned massive geopolitical change. This is really that is like helping to connect the dots from the 2020-2021 period to this day, the 1988 to 1991 period of time, and also the early 1950s, and then even going back to the 1860s with the Civil War. All of those are connecting the dots to this time period. They're all kind of funneled into this time where everything is powerfully expressing. But it also shows where again, all these are just major events that are getting the headlines and the ratings. But there is this really powerful, like, especially in 1989, we had a powerful wave of liberation happen where people became more free from oppression, and democracy began to assert itself between the late 80s and early 90s at its most, well, maybe even carrying into the late 90s at its most robust point. Um, and now it has been on the decline, you know. So where are we with that? That's a question we got to ask ourselves. How do we define democracy? How do we find a democratic republic, which is technically what the US is, for example, a constitutional republic. It has a kind of a mix of things. Um, but we've seen signs that it's become more of an oligarchy, and more of a kind of a, totalitarian, threads in there. And so, like, we have a chance to, redefine all of this. And what will that be? And so this is like we got to look at the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We got to look at all those things and see what's not working. And, I think that there's this place in here, especially with Pluto and Aquarius now, where it's about this greater consciousness that's awakening here and tapping into it from a place of, cosmic love, um, innovation, new forms of energy to work with, an awakening on a spiritual conscious level. Like all of that is playing into all of this too as well. So as we look further, and I would just want to focus on the beginning here, 2024 to 2027, Saturn Neptune conjunction period, 2024 2033, Pluto Neptune sextile, and 2025 2028, Uranus Neptune sextile. And we also have in 2025 Jupiter Neptune square, which just happened like a few days before this recording. So there's more happening in the late 2020s, including Jupiter Neptune opposition and Mars Neptune opposition, before we get into the 2030s that are going to be really powerful. These aren't the only things happening, but these are, really important things, and more will be looked at in future videos. But I wanted to get this out here to everyone here. Um, I know another beyond Chris Brennan, another astrologer, S.J. Anderson. He does really thoughtful, considerate videos with the planetary alignments that are taking place, and something I would encourage you to go and check out as well. But stay tuned for more. Please subscribe to this channel if you really like it, if it's something you are interested in and feel like others are. Please do share this video. I'm a shamanic alchemical astrologer, and I do this for a living. I do astrology readings, mentoring, teach classes, events, and astrocartography. Um, and I have very active practice, and I go up and down the west coast of the U.S. doing readings. I was even in Hawaii and Maui, the island of Maui, in May doing readings out there. So be aware there's going to be more of that coming in the future. And I also co-teach with Kaylin Castell at mystaralchemy.com. We do have online courses available. So yeah, but keep awake, everyone. Go with love, go with spirit, and be kind. We need more kindness and more empathy out there, but not to allow others to trample who you are too, to fight for what's right for you as well. So, all right, everyone, take care, and I wish you the very best.